Hi there, my name is Jimmy Bonero with Notable Solutions, and if you're looking to get started with form scripting on a Xerox EIP device, maybe you're looking for a few examples or you've been wanting to get started on doing some additional things with the Xerox, then this video is for you. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on when a menu item is selected on the panel, and when that form is loaded, we want to assign some default values to some different fields that are inside of there. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is launch AutoStore, and I've already created a folder that's going to hold my config file, and the other one is going to be for my script that we're going to put together. Move that out of the way. I'm going to create a new form for the Xerox, and I will grab our Xerox EIP Connect component, and we're going to grab the send a folder component, although you can use any route component that you wish, but we do need one capture, one route, and this is the capture we want. So let me open that and select the common group, and we're going to add a basic form. We're going to call this form sample. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create some different fields. This first one is going to be a text field. The name column is what we're going to be referencing in the script in order to work with this field, and the display is what the user will see when they walk up to the Xerox device and they select our sample menu item. This will be one of the fields that they see. It'll just simply be called text field in this example. The type of field that it is going to be text. There are some different options here, but this one here, we want it to be a text field. This checkbox is to make the field required, which we'll go ahead and do. And then this next field here, which we're not going to get into in this video, except just to explain that what it does is whenever this field value changes, what we can do is say, I want to watch for any changes that occur in that field. When there are, I want to fire an event off based on the fact that this field value has changed. We won't be doing that here, so I'm going to leave that unchecked. Now, I'll go ahead and create two more fields. One will be a date field, and the next one will be a list field. The only thing I'll mention before we move on to the next tab is that in the name field we can't have any spaces inside of the name that we put in here. If I try to put a space and try to move out, we get a little warning, no spaces. So just one word. For what the user is seeing, perfectly fine to put spaces in there, so we're good there. Now I'm going to come to the General tab, and the next item that we want to come to is this Dynamic Form section here. Enable Dynamic Form. We want to enable that. That's going to allow us to create some code. And the code that we're going to be creating is going to revolve around when the form is loaded. I want to raise an event when the form is loaded. For form is submitted, that would be the equivalent of someone walking up to that Xerox device, placing a document in the document feeder or on the glass, and they push the start button. That would be the equivalent of submitting that. And when I open up Edit Script Code, when the form is submitted, I would be basically calling this section right here. We're going to be working with this section, which is the form on load. As you can see, this code is going to be written in visualbasic.net. And so basic rules revolving visualbasic.net would apply here. Inside of this module is where we're going to be calling our different events. And then right above the module, you'll notice that we've got a few import statements, and these imports are basically importing different namespaces. One is going to be system. This is a standard .NET namespace. And then this other one here is for Xerox EIP capture .workflow. This particular namespace allows us to work with the Xerox device. And as we go forward writing our code, you'll notice that there's some different properties that would be associated to our different field types. And all of that is because we're bringing in this namespace into the script. The code that we're going to be modifying is going to be contained inside of the module. So let's take a look at our module. And before I do anything on the onload, there's a couple of things that I want to do in order to work with these fields. The first thing I want to do is I want to reference what the names of those fields are. Here what I'm doing is I'm dimensionalizing str text field as string equals text field. This is the name of our form field called text field. I'm going to repeat this for the date and for the list field as well. Okay, so now if I make a change to a field, all I need to do is make that change as appropriate here. So in this case, I've got a text field, a date field, and a list field. If I didn't have a list field, then obviously I wouldn't have this line in there. But for every field, I just basically will put the name of that field right in here. So as I go further into the code, this is the only spot I have to make that change. So the next thing I want to do is I want to create the form fields for what they are, meaning a form field for the text field, a form field for the list field, and a form field for the date field. So let me do that right now. So here I'm dimensionalizing FRM, which is kind of a Hungarian notation for form that I used. You could certainly use anything you want. You could say EIP text field or XRX text field for Xerox. I'm keeping this rather generic, so I'm just saying dim FRM text field as a text field. And as a text field comes from the Xerox EIP capture.workflow namespace. It's going to equal event data dot form dot fields dot and then the get field method. Now the get field is we want to get this text field. So the name of the field is what we're actually looking for. So I could just type in quotation marks text field, but what I'm going to do is we're going to grab this variable that we already created. Anytime I use this anywhere in the script where I need to know what the name of the field is, this is the only place that I'm putting that in. So I'm going to repeat this for each of my different form fields. All right, so now that I've created this form field as a text field, let's go ahead and write the next line that we would need in order to assign the default value for that text field. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to type in FRM text field, which is declared as a text field. And when I press the dot value, or the dot, I should probably type this in correctly, you'll notice that I've got some different properties here, and all these properties will relate to what a text field is and what's available to a text field. So what I want is the value. Now I want this value to actually be something, so I simply assign it equals, and we'll type in hello world. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and save this file into my code files folder, and we'll name that scripting Xerox EIP form load .vb. Save that. Now I can close this out. Actually, before I do that, let me compile and just make sure that there are no errors, so I don't have anything going on with my syntax. And now I'm going to click OK. OK. And now we'll save the config file. We'll put that in the config folder and name that OK. Now I'll start the service. So when I push sample, that will fire off the load event. And as it loads, it brings the text field, and as you can see, we've got our text, hello world. So it's doing what I want it to do. We do need to come and address our date field and our list field, which we'll be doing. But there we go. So let me go and close that out because that works. Now I'll stop the service, and we're going to go into our script again. So that was pretty basic. Let's see if we can do something maybe a little more fun. Let's create a helper function where we can say, maybe based on the time of day. So basically what I'm going to do is create a function that is going to tell me whether it's the morning, the afternoon, or the evening. Okay, so this quick little function here basically is going to return whether or not it's between this hour we're in the morning, between these hours it's the afternoon, and between these hours it'll be the evening. So let's have a little more fun with this text value and do something a little bit more than just saying hi. The idea here being that we can create additional functions and call them within our form on load event. And this is probably a very simple example, but utilizing the .NET framework, whatever kind of data that we might need or whatever kind of information we might need, if we need to be able to incorporate that in there to present to the user, there's usually a way that certain things can be done, and it really has to do with building the right kind of code in order to do that. But once you've got the information, now I want to be able to display that to the user. So I'm creating a variable called str time of day, and what that's going to do is equal the value of this function. So whatever the date is, I'm going to be either morning, afternoon, or evening. Next, what I want to do is I want to determine what domain I'm in. So maybe I'm in a corporate environment. And I would like to say, you know, good morning or good afternoon or good evening. To maybe my domain user. Something really simple. So we'll say good space, and then we'll take the time of day. And we'll add a space, and then the name of the domain. And we'll say good morning or good evening or good afternoon to the, I happen to be part of the Acme domain, so I'll say, you know, good afternoon or good evening Acme user, something like that. And then I'm going to take this text that I just created and we're going to replace it, or we're going to replace hello world with that text to the form text field and assign the value to that. So we'll make sure we don't have any errors. Actually, let me turn this back on, show the error panel, compile. We're still showing no errors. If there were any errors, they would be listed right down in here. In fact, I'll go ahead and I'll add something there so that way it doesn't compile right. And sure enough, we get something. So get rid of that, recompile, and we're okay. So I'll save my script. We'll close. And let's start the service. Take a look. All right, so press sample. Now we're going to call form on load, and it happens to be the evening, and I happen to be part of Acme. So there we are. Something a little bit more dynamic is what we did there. So we're done with the text field, and let's move on to our other fields. So the date field we'll do next. All right, just coming back to our fields tab. So our text field is done. Now we're going to look at our date field. So here we load the text field. And now let's load the date field. And we're going to load the date field with something I actually get asked quite a bit, and it's how can I make the current date the default date that shows up. You'll notice that when we actually, let me close, compile, save, close. Let me go back. Okay. So the service is still running. When I open this up, all right, the date field is blank. There's nothing assigned to it right now, but that would mean that the user would have to actually come in and they would have to select their date. So, you know, in the case of July, or today is the 31st, 2013. So they would have to do that, press done, and now they've got the date in there. Let me go back and we're going to reload, which should clear that out. Is how do we pre-populate that with today's date? They can still come in and change it if it's defaulted to that. So we can do that very easily here. All right, so coming back, we're going to load the date field. Now I've already created form date field as a date field. So now I'll say frm date field dot value. Now I'm calling value, which a date field has, and so does a text field. But when we dimensionalize these different items here as the different field types that they are based on the Xerox EIP capture.workflow namespace, each of these different fields has different properties. You know, a date field is inherently different than a list field. So that was another reason for going through this section here. Now, I want to assign this value I want to assign it a date, and we're going to put it out as a certain format. And the way we do that in .NET is if I wanted to do the month / the day / the year, I would use this format right here. And that's the format I want. So I'm done with that. Let me go ahead and compile. We'll save it. And let's see. See what that looks like. All right, and there we are. The date field has been populated with today's date using the formatting that I wanted. One thing to keep in mind whenever we're pre-populating date fields is if I'm going to use this date and I'm going to send that to, say, a Windows folder, and I want to use that value to name the file, these slashes in between the date parts can be problematic if we're naming a file. So in that case, we might want to use a dash or something like that. But if I was feeding a date field within, say, SharePoint or DocuShare or another system like that where this is perfectly fine, then great. So that's enough on dates. Now let's go ahead and look at the list field. Now if I press the list field, I've got no items in here. So let me close that out. And we'll come back to the Process Designer, open up our script. All right. And now that we've loaded a text field and a date field, the next thing that we want to do is we want to load a list field. And we want to put some different items in there. Now, generally we get list values from somewhere or some kind of data source of some type. we can manually add them inside of the list field when we go to the Fields tab inside of the config file. But in this case, maybe I'm trying to load values from some kind of data source. And that data source doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a database. It could be a lot of different places where we can get that. We can get information from virtually anywhere that we could tap into. For now, just to get a list going, let's build something really simple. I'm building a for next because what I want to do is I want to basically loop through 12 times, and I want to use the add method for that list field item. Now, frm list field is the field that we created right up here. We've already declared it as a list field. To add an item, we would do items and then the add method. Now we're creating a new list item, so I'm going to say new list item. Now with the list item, there are 3 properties with a Xerox device. One is going to be the label, one is going to be the value, and one is going to be the description. In some cases, the label and the value are always the same, but they can be different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say item, and I'm just going to go ahead and make this the same thing, and then I'm going to add a comma, and the final item here is our description. For the description, I'm going to put in 2 double quotes to signify that we're putting in a string that will have basically nothing in there. It's not technically nothing, but it's, for all intents and purposes, it's nothing. Nothing in there. So what I'm going to do is for I equals integer, or for I as integer equals 1 to 0, I'm going to say item I. And as it loops through, I's value will begin to change. So I should end up with item 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 12. All right, let's compile and make sure there aren't any errors. Save it. And we'll go back to our emulator after we restart. All right, here's our sample. And list field doesn't show anything here. All right, but when I select this, I now have 12 items in there. So at this point, a user could select one of those items, press done, and they've got the item selected. All right, so let's close this out and let's do something a little bit more useful. I'm going to come to my folder, and inside of this folder that I just added here called data, I have a text file. This text file has a list of names. What I want to do is I want to make these names part of that list. So I am going to grab this path. So if I move this down, I'm going to comment this part out. Alright, so I made a reference to the path to that text file, and this is going to hold it. Now the next thing is I'm going to loop through each one. So I'm going to say for each, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for each line as string in, if I go to system.io read all lines from this path, I want to build that list. Now this wouldn't work, so I need to basically say that instead of item 1, item 2, and so on, I would say for each line. Each line was going to hold the value of the line. Again, this is the description, so I'll just leave that blank. If you want, we can put it in there too, just so we can see what the description is. Alright, and alright, compile, no errors. We'll save, restart the service, open our emulator. And while that's open, I'll go ahead and open up. There's our names, so we should see. Alright, for the list field, there are our names. Now if I were to add a new name to that list, say we'll add Joe Sample, and we'll add Billy Golden, and I save that, this list is not reflected. If I were to go back and come back into the list field, it's still not going to be reflected because that happens on the form load. So what I need to do is go back out and actually press this button again. When I do that and I come into list field, now these items are listed that I just added. So that concludes this video. I hope it's been informative, and until next time, thanks for watching.